Welcome to my video essay where I will be talking about UK director Olly Lambert. In this video essay, I will be discussing some of Lambert's films along with an in-depth analysis of some notable scenes from his work. Olly Lambert is a freelance documentary filmmaker. According to his website, Lambert has won over a dozen awards for his work in areas of conflict, including an Emmy, 2 BAFTAs, an RTS, a Grierson, and the Foreign Press Association Award for Journalist of the Year. He has worked as a producer and assistant on documentaries for the BBC and Channel 4 before being commissioned to make his own film for Channel 4's Strand for new directors. Some of his films include A Week Behind the Scenes at the Trump White House Briefing Room, My Child the Rioter, Mom and Dad Are Splitting Up, One Day in Gaza and Ukraine, The People's Fight. Lambert has won a number of international awards, including the Foreign Press Association Award for Journalist of the Year, and was the recipient of the 2014 Peter McGee Fellowship, which honors a filmmaker whose work reflects excellence, intelligence, fairness, and scholarship. He says that his films focus on extraordinary people and extraordinary situations, and he hopes he can bring intimacy and clarity to tough, complex subjects. One of the films we will be discussing is The President vs. Press. The President vs. Press is a film on the mainstream media involved with Donald Trump's presidency in 2017. Filmed, edited, and broadcast in 2 weeks, this short film goes behind the scenes at the White House briefing room to see how an embattled White House press corps is coming to terms with a very new kind of president. This was broadcasted on BBC Newsnight, then internationally on BBC World. Another one of Lambert's films that we will be discussing is The Bombing of Al-Bara. The Bombing of Al-Bara is a film set on October 28, 2012, taken from a village in Idlib, a province an hour south of Aleppo. A critic from PBS Frontline says that this film captures the chaos on the ground as villagers try to rescue family members and friends trapped under the rubble, the bombing's effects on ordinary civilians whose lives literally have just been blown apart, the terrible fear when the government jets return for a second bombing run, and the ensuing calls for revenge that illustrate the country's descent into a no-man's land of hatred, suspicion, and terror. The film was broadcast on PBS Frontline in 2013. Here is a clip from PBS NewsHour where Olly Lambert discusses a little bit about his experience during the bombings.
Getting a real sense of what was going on?
Well, I mean, I've made documentaries in areas of conflict for on and off for about 10 years now, and this was far and away the most bitter and most violent conflict zone I've ever been to. I mean, by a very long margin. Every day I was witnessing death and bloodshed. I was either seeing people get killed, or I was seeing the aftermath of people being killed, or I was seeing people being buried. Nothing really rammed it home how awful this conflict has become than the airstrike that is a significant part of the film. I was actually filming with a rebel commander called Jamal Maroof. He was one of the most powerful rebel leaders in the region that I was staying in. And while I was filming him, as the camera was running, a raging jet flew overhead and dropped what was clearly a very large bomb on the very village that I was in, and it landed just less than 300 meters from where I was sitting. The force of it threw me to the ground, and it killed 17 people, and there are many more injured, and there weren't any other journalists, either Arab or Western, for many, many miles. And to witness the sort of destruction and the bloodshed on that scale was quite horrific. But it was more than that. It was the indiscriminate attacks on civilians, on a civilian population, many of whom were actually refugees. The people in the villages that I was staying in, many of them had fled to these villages from the cities. They thought that the villages were safer. And then their worlds are literally blown apart in front of them. It was a really shocking experience. I've never really witnessed or experienced anything like that.
Another one of Lambert's films is Abuse: The Untold Story. Abuse: The Untold Story is about the revelations about Jimmy Savile in October 2012, which caused national outrage and widespread soul-searching. Fundamental questions were asked about how predatory pedophile could have hidden not just in plain sight, but in the spotlight of national fame for 5 decades and escaped justice in the process. This feature-length film tells the dramatic story of how the Savile revelations unfurled across the nation and how it impacted on institutions, families, and our whole understanding of childhood sexual abuse. Lambert says that the fact that they're able to speak about it really clearly and really powerfully with a bit of distance is an obvious testament to how far they are able to move on from it, and how the very act of talking about it is such a release, almost a physical release. So that sort of becomes part of the film. The act of talking becomes profoundly cathartic, and in a few cases quite life-changing. This film was broadcasted on BBC in 2016. Now we are going to do an in-depth analysis from the film The Bombing of Albara. In this scene, Lambert starts by showing groups of men together pointing at jets that they can see in the sky. Lambert explains that the jets will fly together and then go for a bombing run. What's fascinating about this scene and film is that Lambert is using a single camera set up the entire time this is happening. Lambert was able to capture so much in the scene while only using one camera. The next scene shows a group of men together angrily shouting as they are holding the body of a dead woman who died in the bombing. What's really interesting is that watching this scene, I couldn't help but look away as this is incredibly graphic. The men in the scene are very persistent that Lambert shows the corpse. They keep saying that this is the fault of the United Nations. Lambert says that everywhere I went, people kept telling me what to film, what to see, and wanted to address the camera. They wanted to express their anger and their rage. It was almost a problem how much they wanted to put themselves in front of the camera. The next part shows Lambert and the men running from the jet missiles, and you can hear the shattering noise. Lambert describes it as terrifyingly loud.
The roar of a jet coming that low is an absolutely nerve-shattering experience. It's one these people had experienced many times, but for me it was unprecedented.
You can see a woman running with her son and consoling him out of fear.
Clearly flying incredibly low. Quite what its target was or could have been, I have no idea.
The final part of the scene shows the same man from earlier praying to God and asking for justice. You can see him point in the second bomb as this happens immediately after. I think this scene is incredibly important because you don't actually see Lambert at all while he is filming this, and it makes you feel like you are there, especially with the use of the single camera setup. When he is running from the jet missiles and interacting with the Syrians, it makes it seem like anyone could be experiencing this. This demonstrates Lambert's talent as a director, and the fact that he did this all with such minimal editing demonstrates how realistic and raw he made this in order to fully inform the audience. The goal of this film was to be educated and informed, but also not to look away even if you felt like it. Next, we're going to be discussing a clip from The President vs. Press. In this scene of The President vs. Press, President Donald Trump is holding a press conference with the Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. This scene gives an overview of the amount of press and journalists that are here to address the current situation. At this point in time, a story was going around that linked Trump's campaign to the Russian government. Many journalists were at this press conference to gather information on this story. I noticed that Lambert filmed this scene making all of the journalists looking up at Trump in search of answers and information when he does the very opposite and deflects the question, almost having Trump look like this big figure and controlling the media narrative. He also only picks certain journalists from conservative news outlets and ignores the major networks.
Thank you, Mr. President.
For the second time this week, Trump ignores the major networks. Instead, he selects questions from two small conservative news outlets. Neither asked directly about his links with Russia.
President, are you going to answer any questions about your associates' contacts with the Russians?
The scene switches to a live view of the moment from a TV news channel as Trump leaves the room. All of the journalists get up to push him to answer their question, but he ignores them. The scene then switches back to all of the journalists looking around in confusion and frustration as they weren't able to get the answers they wanted. I feel like this scene is a great reflection of Lambert trying to portray how much politics have been able to influence media and how much censorship plays a role when it comes to mass information. The irony of watching this film and knowing how our world looks today, especially considering now that Trump administration is allowing only certain journalists to come to press conferences. In the next scene, you'll hear from some journalists to express their frustration from this moment.
The Russian government, Russian intelligence, and the issue doesn't come up in a press conference because he's calling on friendly news outlets. I mean, it's really amazing. They had to work very hard to find, to be able to call on two reporters who would not ask that question. I mean, that takes some doing. I wanted to, jump up and say, wait a minute, you fired him. Why did you fire him?
Next is a clip of Lambert at the 2014 BAFTA Masterclass at the Sheffield Documentary Fest.
I'm far less interested in the process of filmmaking as I am about the subjects that I film. And the filmmaking is often just an excuse to be really nosy or to have some kind of adventure, either psychologically or geographically, and I think that's a really good drive. And that's that kind of, it sort of satisfies a curiosity, and the filmmaking sort of comes second to that, usually. So I had no desire to sort of pursue that again, and after that I did a very straight historical documentary about Rasputin and made it, and tried to make a little horror movie about some guy 100 years ago. And I thought that's the fun of it, really. I didn't want to, and I hope I haven't ever sort of fall into a trap of repeating myself. Otherwise I'd sort of rot a bit.
Yeah, I was going to say, what?
This clip demonstrates how Lambert views his filming as an opportunity to give stories to the subjects he is filming. This further emphasizes that documentaries can something to be made as a way to showcase his documenting skills, but as a way to inform himself and others on the subjects he is documenting. He's aware that being a filmmaker comes with difficulties, and he takes pride in that. After analyzing Olly Lambert's films, I believe I have a better understanding of the documentary world and the process that goes into it. For Lambert, I don't think he has a specific style when it comes to filmmaking, but I think what separates him from other filmmakers is his ability to tell a story without taking away the core message. I think that filmmakers sometimes draw away from the core message that a story is trying to tell and often add too much glamour and entertainment to the film. For Lambert, I think his style is presented with authenticity and raw storytelling. He isn't trying to fabricate or diminish the story and gives all subjects of his story the opportunity to make their voices heard. From allowing Syrians to get in front of his camera, to speaking with victims of child abuse, and finally interviewing journalists at the White House, Lambert isn't trying to hold anything back. I appreciate his work even more after taking the time to study it, and I look forward to seeing more of it.